go. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Lori McCauley, Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs. And it's great to see everyone here. Welcome to you, and welcome to Insights into Distinguished Careers, this year's Distinguished University Professorship Lecture Series. It's such an honor to be here with all of you and to celebrate these phenomenal colleagues that we have this evening. I would like to thank our moderator and my partner, Mike Solomon, who serves as Dean and Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, Graduate Studies at the Rackham Graduate School, who will be joining me as host today. And I'm delighted to welcome our colleagues, Professor Ruth Behar, Professor HJ Jagadish, and Professor Eva Feldman, who we're going to celebrate. These are outstanding members of our faculty, come from diverse fields, as you'll see, anthropology, data science, and neurology. But what unites them is the same set of values that brings us together as a community, a deep and relentless curiosity, a dedicated pursuit of knowledge and understanding, and an unwavering commitment to scholarly excellence and professional impact. These three distinguished professors, like many of you all here in this room and across our university, are leaders in their fields. They're dedicated to shaping our future through discovery, innovation, and impact. Just as importantly, they're committed to our students, to teaching, developing, and mentoring the next outstanding generation of scholars, public servants, and teachers. Together, they're forging lasting legacies at our university, even as they take their places as luminaries in their respective disciplines. Together, they're demonstrating why the University of Michigan is such an exceptional place of research and education and an inspiration to institutions around the world. With that, it's my great pleasure to start with our first colleague and introduce Ruth Behar, the James W. Fernandez Distinguished University Professor of Anthropology in the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts. Professor Behar is a cultural anthropologist, poet, and author known for the compassion she brings to her exploration of the human experience. Born in Havana, Cuba, and raised in New York, she's lived in Spain and Mexico and has returned to Cuba to build bridges around culture and art. She writes about her journeys, including the presence of the past in a Spanish village, an island called home, returning to Jewish Cuba, and Traveling Heavy, a memoir in between journeys. Her much-cited book, The Vulnerable Observer, Anthropology That Breaks Your Heart, is read across the humanities and social sciences. The first Latina to be named a MacArthur Genius. Behar has also received a John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship, an American Council of Learned Societies Fellowship, a Fulbright Senior Fellowship, a Distinguished Alumna Award from Wesleyan University, an honorary degree from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, and the Carnegie Corporation's Greatest Immigrant Award. Wow. She's an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and has been at the University of Michigan since 1986, when she arrived on a postdoctoral fellowship from the Society of Fellows. And rumor has it she planned to be here 3 years only. We're so fortunate that she extended her stay. I'm pleased, and please join me in welcoming and inviting Professor Behar to present her lecture today.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. Wow, it's amazing to be here. Thank you. I was a very pregnant woman the day I arrived at the University of Michigan with my husband in the summer of 1986. I gave birth quietly as I could. I was worried that my colleagues would find it unprofessional of me to be pregnant when starting an academic job. And deep down, I was worried whether I would fit in, I who come from a working-class immigrant family. In September, I began my position at the Society of Fellows. By January, I was teaching, and I'd run home after lecturing to breastfeed my son, Gabriel. I'd been doing field work in the Mexican town of Mesquitic, where the women had urged me to have a child before I grew too old, though I was only in my late 20s. One woman would call out whenever she saw David and me, "Adam and Eve, Eve and Adam, are you two going to be alone forever? Who will heat up tortillas for you when you're old?" Their magic worked. It seemed like the worst moment to become a mother, but in retrospect, I realized that the women of Mesquitic taught me a lesson. They taught me to trust in the beauty and danger of life. I am grateful they made me a mother and now a grandmother. I truly can't imagine life without Gabriel, who is the best son ever. And I know I couldn't have done all the things I've done without David, who's right here. I am thankful for his support and love and for helping me with my PowerPoints. I have so much gratitude for the intellectual and creative home I found here. I thank the University of Michigan, and especially my colleagues in the Department of Anthropology, and Professor Kelly Askew, our astonishing chair. We are unique as anthropologists because we address different perspectives on the human condition through a wide range of approaches. Even my poetic take on the world fits generously in our profession. All the impressive students I've worked with, both undergraduate and graduate, have given me a community of imagination and possibility. My PhD students come from diverse backgrounds, and their research and writing have opened my eyes to the interwoven world in which we live. I thank my previous students and the students I'm working with currently for pursuing knowledge with compassion for humanity and the fragile earth that we inhabit. I chose to name my distinguished professorship after Professor James W. Fernandez. Now 92, Jim, now 92, was my mentor and dissertation advisor at Princeton. He is a Midwesterner from Western Illinois, but his grandfather was from a village in Asturias in northern Spain. That's how he acquired his last name, Fernandez. Often, when he was starting out, his articles didn't get published because of that last name. And yet, it was that name that allowed him to see and support me. Jim introduced me to the Spanish countryside. He knew of a village in Leon called Santa Maria del Monte and took me there. "Okay, now go do field work," he said as he was driving off. What? How was I going to talk to strangers? I was too shy. That's when my career as a story listener began. Jim told me to go house to house, introduce myself, and carry out a kind of census, find out how many cows, how many sheep, how many pigs, how many people lived in each house. I soon had reams of notes about family, inheritance, land tenure, but Jim also drew my attention to what he called the argument of images and how humans use symbols and metaphors to make sense of the world. He wanted anthropologists to recognize the inexpressible, what he referred to as the dark at the bottom of the stairs. He wanted us to look deeply at that which had no language, and so we had to create poetic language to see and understand it. I am the descendant of Jewish refugees from Turkey, Poland, and Russia, who found a home in Cuba where I was born. I grew up translating between cultures, places, and languages. I think of the upheavals my family experienced, and I'm in awe of how they found the courage to close the door to their homes and go in search of a new home elsewhere. How do you pack a suitcase and leave behind everything you've ever known? I chose to be an anthropologist. I chose a profession where I'd always be packing and unpacking a suitcase, reenacting the search for home. I would live among strangers, hoping they would take me in, hoping they would share their stories. I was never going to be a light traveler. I would travel heavy. I would drag with me my ancestors and the weight of their homesickness. I was drawn to the Spanish-speaking world because of my love for the Spanish language. It comes to me from my Cuban heritage and further back from my Sephardic heritage. The Sephardim, the Jews expelled from Spain in 1492, have been called Spaniards without a country. They held on to Spanish throughout their many diasporas. In the absence of a territory, the language became their home, which they wrote in Hebrew letters. It is eerie how much of the memory of the Jewish presence still remains in Spain. You find it in the vestiges of a synagogue in Toledo, now a Sephardic museum, and in street names like Prado de los Judíos, Meadow of the Jews, in the city of León, an area next to the medieval walls where there was once a Jewish cemetery. From the first moment, I felt a bond with the people of the Spanish village of Santa Maria del Monte. It was their rootedness I sought to understand, something I lacked and longed for. I found it deeply moving to meet aging farmers who lived off the land and raised cattle and sheep and pigs at a time when people were leaving the villages for Madrid and other cities. The farmers felt abandoned, and they felt no pride. They were ashamed and humiliated to be working like brutes on the land, as they said of themselves. It hurt me to hear them say that. I didn't see them that way. I marveled at their knowledge of how to wrest food from the earth. They'd never seen the sea. They were bound to their cherished piece of land and the farm animals they cared for all year long. I think people in Santa Maria took me in with affection because their children and grandchildren had left. Out of nowhere, I had appeared, asking for their stories, wanting to bear witness to their efforts to remain on the land. I listened to their stories and tried to also hear the voices of their ancestors. In the village, there was a trunk filled with historical documents that had been passed on from generation to generation. I studied what they'd kept and found additional documents in the archives that confirmed that the village had existed at least since medieval times. After transcribing the documents word by word, this was on a manual typewriter in the late 70s, early 80s, I shared them with villagers. Together, we made the journey into the past, finding ancestors who'd lived on the same land as they did. As a group, anthropologists are perhaps the most self-questioning of scholars. I certainly worried for years what my presence in the village had meant and what purpose it had served. My work was hailed as innovative and bringing together history and anthropology, but what pleased me the most was discovering how it became a resource for descendants of the villagers. Through my writing, they connected with grandparents and great-grandparents they hadn't known, but whose lives I'd witnessed and documented. My efforts at preservation were a refusal to allow the people of Santa Maria to disappear into oblivion. Thousands of photographs I took are now in the possession of the village and posted on their community website. An ethnographic museum has opened in León, and the farm tools I once saw people use for planting and harvesting are hung on the walls, and the carts have been shellacked for display. Yet living traditions continue, as I learned when I recently met Tonio. He's a chef who grew up in Madrid and has returned with his wife and child to work in León and reclaim his roots in the village. On his right arm, he tattooed the chef, but on his left arm, it was his grandmother, he said. As Tonio held up his left arm and showed me on his cell phone the image the tattoo was modeled on, I realized it was one of my photographs. Amparo wore her black widow's dress, sifting kernels of wheat with a handmade wooden sieve. I'd taken the picture in 1984, and now, almost 4 decades later, it had been etched into the flesh of a grandson. My anthropology had acquired new meaning for Tonio and others who were part of a new generation searching for their heritage. It was a revelation to see past and present mesh in an unexpected, beautiful interconnectedness that anthropology had made possible. I went on to Mexico. I spent 3 years and several summers living in Mezquitic, a town in San Luis Potosí. There, I came to know an outspoken street peddler named Esperanza Hernandez, who convinced me hers was the most interesting life story of any woman in the town. She challenged me to write a book big enough to encompass everything she'd experienced: hunger, poverty, domestic violence, accusations of being a witch, and her strength to overcome it all. When she told me that 6 of her babies died in infancy from consuming the rage that poisoned her breast milk, I felt the depth of her loss and how she'd found a symbolic meaning for it. I would remember her terrible sorrow later when I breastfed my son. In Translated Woman, I reflected how the two of us, women of such different backgrounds, a storyteller and a story listener, found a way to connect and form a meaningful relationship. She made me aware that I could cross the border, but she couldn't, and I felt the inequity in our relationship and the irony of her story making the journey across without her. In opening herself to me and trusting me to carry her story across the border, Esperanza helped me find the voice to do the writing I dreamed of, poetic, personal, from the heart. Her courage gave me courage. Listening to Esperanza, transcribing and translating her words, I asked myself, how can I write this story without being versed in the writing of the women anthropologists who came before me? Women's contributions to anthropological theory and ethnographic writing were often erased, not taught, not cited enough. With Deborah Gordon, I edited an anthology, Women Writing Culture, interrogating the gendered politics of citation and whose work counts as theory, and bringing to light the work of writers like Zora Neale Hurston and Ella Deloria, pioneering women of color within American anthropology who combine scholarship with creative writing. Knowing my intellectual genealogy gave me more confidence to ask questions about how our knowledge of society and culture is produced. At the core of it all is the messy, haunting, unrepeatable process of listening to people tell the stories of how they give meaning to their lives. Could I do justice to everyone who had given me their stories to safekeep? Could I research and write in a way that let me speak of the beauty and danger of life? Trying to answer those questions, I saw myself as a vulnerable observer. I thought of the emotional transformation felt by anthropologists and their interlocutors when they collaborate together as storytellers and story listeners. I thought about how immigrants enter into the realm of the unexpected, as do anthropologists. And I thought, as an immigrant anthropologist, I was keenly aware of impermanence, of all the things we can't see in the dark at the bottom of the stairs. I realized how much I cherished moments of connection and how grateful I was for compassionate translations of experience that could open the door to people's stories that might otherwise never be heard or understood. I felt there was something sacred about this work, and so I dared to say that anthropology that doesn't break your heart isn't worth doing. And after that, there was no turning back. My heart felt like it was breaking many times when I began to travel back and forth to Cuba in the 1990s. For the next 30 years, I would engage with Cuba on many levels, creating cultural, scholarly, and artistic bridges, and gaining an intimate knowledge of the homeland that had given refuge to my Jewish family. My parents, like many Cuban exiles, were against the idea of my returning to the island. I carried the weight of their fears with me. I was exiled from the exiles. Walking along the sea-misted streets of Havana, I wept. I needed solace, so I wrote poems. This is the bridges. In broken streets of my city, las calles rotas de mi ciudad, which is encased in a beautiful handmade book by the Cuban artist Rolando Esteves, I dream of returning with my parents to Cuba. There I'll say to them, we will walk barefoot in the rain, so much water we will float. Carry us carefully, I will ask. Eventually I wandered into the synagogues in Havana and traveled around the island, discovering fragments of Jewish memory that had survived amid years of revolution. I had never researched Jewishness before and wasn't sure where to begin. The people led the way, as always in my research, and they showed me they'd kept prayer shawls, a Jewish marriage certificate, letters in Yiddish, a postcard from a concentration camp, markers of an identity that they had hidden during the revolutionary heyday. Some were Jews by choice, bringing diverse cultural traditions and an important Black presence to the community of 1,000 people and raising their children to be Jewish. I got to know a young woman named Anaida who grew up with her Black Cuban mother, a Jehovah's Witness, and a sister who practiced Santeria while choosing to be Jewish like her Cuban Sephardic father. I made a documentary, Adiós Querida, a mosaic of stories about Cuba's Sephardic Jews that I dedicated to my father, who I included in the film, connecting him to the island he didn't want to return to. Afterwards, I still had stories to tell, and in my book, An Island Called Home, I explored moments of epiphany, being in the presence of Jews in Cuba. Each person I met gave me a glimpse of who I might have been had my family chosen to stay in Cuba and not made me an immigrant. Already as a child, I had started to reflect on what it means to be vulnerable. Soon after arriving from Cuba, I almost died in a car accident that took 5 lives. I had to spend a year in bed, entombed in a body cast. At the age of 10, I became an immigrant girl, unable to move. I found comfort in books and art and became keenly aware of human suffering and the need for empathy. One summer day, 10 years ago, recalling that girl I once was, I sat down to tell her story in her voice, imagining myself inside her body. I felt her anger, her sadness, her despair. But I knew she also had a community filled with diverse people who cared about her. I drew on memories of the working-class neighborhood in which I'd grown up in Queens, New York, where immigrants from Cuba, India, Belgium, and other places converged. A novel that both a 10-year-old and an adult could read took form, which I titled Lucky Broken Girl. It was about seeing how the heart opens once you realize you're not alone, that others are feeling your pain, and that there are others in still greater pain than you. I hadn't planned to be a writer for young people, but more books followed as I found that there was little written that made the insights of anthropology come alive for a new generation. And so now, as a public speaker, I spend time having conversations with kids about cultural heritage, historical memory, the meaning of empathy, and healing. I'll never forget my visit to PS 117, the public elementary school I attended in Queens, where the kids, all of them child immigrants like me, for whom I was the first author they had ever met, kept asking, "Did you really go to this school?" Everywhere I've gone, I've been astonished by the generosity of strangers. And it is this generosity that gives me hope. Anthropology allowed me to find a home in the home of others. I could feel comfortable sleeping in the warmth of a Spanish bedroom above the barn where the cows and pigs slept. I could be entranced by 1,001 nights of stories told to me by a Mexican storyteller who couldn't read or write. I could wear a dress of poems penned by Cuban and American women made to fit my measurements. Traveling heavy, yet always feeling safe, I could trust the world, and I want to believe that is still true today, November 9th, 2023. My life as an anthropologist has been a gift. I hope my work has helped show that distance can be bridged with vulnerability, and that leading with the heart is how to best understand one another and find meaning in our lives. Looking both forward and back at myself, at the world around me, at the people I've met who have trusted me enough to let me into their lives, I realize what I have continually sought to envision is a world where no one is a stranger, and at the dark, at the bottom of the stairs, there is light. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to moderate questions for our distinguished university professor. There's a microphones, and we also have questions are available both here in the room and online as well. We'll pass a microphone to you. I'm happy to begin the questions. You talked about the anthropology and then also creative writing and poetry. And from someone at a distance, I understand that those, or I have a sense that those have distinct methodologies. Could you talk a little bit about how those align with each other, or the tension around those two, and how you have resolved those as somebody that has operated in both?
Thank you. That's such a great question. Well, they each do have different methodologies, different sensibilities attached to each other. So with anthropology, I am very faithful to what people tell me, and so I often record interviews, and I'm often in the role of transcribing interviews, and because they're all in Spanish, since I work in the Spanish language, then I'm also a translator. So that's a very distinct methodology, and it also involves hanging out with people for long periods of time and maintaining long-term relationships. So I'm still connected to the people in Spain that I knew when I was 20 years old. We were just there this summer, again, visiting people. So you have these really long-term relationships, and they're very meaningful. And even if I'm not writing about people anymore, I still, cherish the relationship that I have with people that I've worked with as an anthropologist. So that's a very, very distinct, way of doing your work, and having this respect for what people say to you, how they think about their lives, what they've shared with you, and to try to then pass it on to others through books and essays and so on, and be faithful to what you were told and what you heard and what you understood. With poetry, it's a different thing. With poetry, I feel like there I can just access emotions. Like there I can, as you saw from that little fragment from the Broken Streets poem, I'm suddenly talking to my parents and saying something I haven't actually said to them, but that I could imagine saying. So in the poem, I can go into this kind of space of emotion that is very special, and I can say things that I probably would never say aloud. So I feel like poetry allows me to enter into that space. And then most recently with fiction, that is something that I always wanted to write fiction, but I was very afraid to write fiction because I thought, wait, I'm going to make things up? I mean, I can make up dialogue, and I can put characters in one place or another. Is that really possible? It seemed like that was like just too much freedom to do whatever you wanted. And so I kept wanting to do it and then never did it until finally I started writing Lucky Broken Girl and thought, well, I'm not that girl anymore. I was that girl in a cast once upon a time, but I'm not that girl anymore. And I have to put myself in her place. But of course, I didn't record my life when I was 10 years old. This is in case there are any 10-year-olds here. You should be recording your lives. But I didn't record my life at that point. So I thought, well, what can I use, to tell this story? And I had to truly use my imagination. I could ask my parents and my brother for some memories, which I did. But ultimately, I had to recreate and reconstruct that through my imagination. And that was a whole other process that was very different from the other two. And I'm just really glad that I've had the opportunity to try my hand at these different ways of telling what I think of them all as anthropological stories, but in different forms and genres and different voices.
Thank you. I can see how stories pervade all the disciplines.
They do.
We have one question here. Yep. And there's a microphone, please. Could you use it so that people online can hear you? Thank you.
Speaking of, is this on? Yeah. Speaking of stories, have you ever been tempted in your work with students to focus on some of their life stories and translate those for a wider audience?
That's a really interesting question. No, I haven't really done that. My students write their own stories, and I encourage that. I teach a course on ethnographic writing, and one of the things that they can do is what we call autoethnography, where they're writing both about places or people that they've gotten to know and also about themselves in relationship to those experiences. So it's more like I'm helping students who want to write in this way. I'm certainly not forcing anybody to write this way, but those who want to, I try to show them like different models for this kind of writing and this kind of thinking. But I haven't actually myself tried to write about my students. I think they're all very eager to write about their own experiences on their own, but I think it's an interesting idea. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your lecture. Please join me in thanking our distinguished university professor.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Behar. I knew you were a distinguished scholar. I learned that you are a story listener, and you're an incredibly moving storyteller as well, so thank you. I now have the honor of introducing HJ Jagadish, the Edgar F. Codd Distinguished University Professor and Bernard A. Galler Collegiate Professor of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science in the College of Engineering and Director of the Michigan Institute for data science. Professor Jagadish works across disciplines and brings groups together to achieve great things. His goal is to make complex databases as easy to query as it is to Google the web. Within the university and the international research community, he's a leader in both his own field of database management and the broader area of data science, developing new types of systems and expanding their use. This has led to interdisciplinary connections and papers and grant proposals with researchers in more than 30 U of M departments. Professor Jagadish is well known for his broad-ranging research on information management and has over 200 major papers and 38 patents with an H index of 101. He's been a fellow of the Association for Computing Machinery since 2003 and a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science since 2018. He currently chairs the board of the Academic Data Science Alliance and served on the board of the Computing Research Association from 2009 to 2018. He's been a program chair of many prestigious conferences and serves as a trustee of the Very Large Database Foundation. Since 2016, he's been the editor of the Springer Synthesis lecture series on data management. His many awards include the ACM Sigmod Contributions Award in 2013 and the Distinguished Alumnus Award from the Indian Institute of Technology in 2020. I'm pleased to introduce one of the nation's most visible and influential leaders in the field of data science. Please join me in welcoming Professor H.V. Jagadish.
It's very hard to give a speech after a poet has stolen our hearts. I'm going to try. So I have structure. 3 parts. First part, diversity. So AI depends on data. And what I work on and think about is the data that AI depends on. So 10 years ago, I led a community white paper on big data and its impact on society, and this is figured from that paper. And you can see this big data ecosystem and AI is a little piece of this system. There's a lot of plumbing that has to be done before you can do AI. So in terms of big data, people talk about volume, velocity, and variety as the 3 V's of big data. And if you see how people talk about it, this word cloud shows you big data, you see volume, storage, processing, things like this. And if you hunt hard, you will see variety up there. That little piece of big data has been my focus of work. And I'd say a little more about why I think variety is less considered than volume. But first, let me just talk about variety or diversity in data as a challenge. So here's a very simple example of a company that has a US arm and a European arm, and they're just recording sales. And you'll see lots of differences in the way that they've chosen to design their databases. And these are quite reasonable choices. You're not going to look at one and say this is right and the other is wrong. You're going to say that's reasonable and this is reasonable too. And the number of places that these things differ is very large. So if you now want to ask a question, if you want to put these things together and simply want to say what are my total sales, that's hard to do given something like this. Even worse, you have some people who query databases have a structure of the world in their heads that they're trying to get out of whatever it is the system has in it, which usually doesn't match. So here's the table, and somebody says, I want sales of wagons in each US state last year. Well, the first thing you have to do is to figure out how wagons relate to buggies and carts, right? And then it turns out this data set is only about aggregated sales in the US, and the query is about US states. And so then you have to say, what else do I know about the way sales are usually distributed that I can somehow at least produce some kind of an estimate for the user? Now, you might think that these are problems that arise when we put data sets together, but I think these are relatively fundamental problems, and they arise even when you do thoughtful initial construction. So if we look at, for instance, how we think about sex and gender, historically we thought of sex and gender as the same thing, and these things admit only two values, and that's the current state of many existing data sets. Today we recognize the need for a richer representation, and the University of Michigan and many other peer universities are thinking hard about how we should reflect our understanding of these issues in the data sets that we have about our students or faculty or staff, whatever. In spite of all this care and thought, there isn't universal agreement on a nomenclature of gender values. And where we're going to be a year or two from now is that we will have a system at the University of Michigan, and our peer institutions will have somewhat similar but not exactly the same system. And it'll still be a challenge for us to reconcile these things if we want to get information across units. Okay, so far I've been talking about diversity in the data set. I want to talk about diversity in the data results. So suppose I have this data set, so each diamond is a data point in my big database, and I've just plotted it in a two-dimensional space. So things that are close by are more similar than things that are further apart. Now, if I come in and I say, well, I've got this circle, and I'd like to get data points in my data set that are similar to my query object in the center, I might pull up these three red diamonds that are the closest. Okay, and I've drawn concentric circles from my query point so you can see that they are indeed the closest. Now, if you look at this, you'll see that these are all somewhat to the northeast of my query point and are all closely clustered together, and this is often a bad choice to produce when somebody asks for something near something. Okay, and so a better answer might be to produce the three red diamonds I have in this slide, and we pay a penalty for this in terms of having to go to a slightly larger circumference, but the net result is a richer data set, which in many cases is more valuable as a result. And so this is the kind of way in which diversity plays a role in terms of something that you might normally think of as a very dry mechanical thing like data. And in fact, my takeaway from working on computer systems is that a system that can handle diversity is more difficult to design and to build than one that cannot, but it is also more widely usable and more robust to change. And I think the similarities between this and what we think of about diversity in the human context is probably not so surprising. Okay, so moving on to equity. So first, let me define what I think of as equity. Treat entities based on their circumstances to achieve comparable, quote, assessment conditions, whatever that might be. Okay? So what this necessarily means is we are taking into account circumstances and therefore treating entities differently. Okay, so equity is not treating the same way. So this is a cartoon that shows the general idea of a fair versus an equitable distribution. Okay? And this is something that is a well understood principle. We use this all the time. So in terms of, for example, our exams, it's fair to give each student the same amount of time in class to take an exam, but it is equity that requires that some students get extra time. Right? And so we do this all the time, and then the question is, how does this reflect itself in terms of stuff that we do with data? Okay? And so remember, AI depends on data. So AI models are learned from training data. And so what the model learns depends on what you have in the data. So a thing that everybody learns in Machine Learning 101 is to say, I must, in my training data, have good proportionate representation for all groups in the population. Okay? Mathematically, they'll say that my training data should be a uniform and random sample of the universe. Okay. This, it turns out, is not good enough. So, for example, Facebook has a real names policy, which says that when you sign up for Facebook, you have to give them your real name. And they have an AI that checks to see if what you've given them is a real name, because a lot of people try to fool it with something that's not a real name. And if you give it something that it thinks is a real name, it'll accept that as being your real name. Okay? But Dana Lonehill wasn't recognized as a real name by Facebook, right? It's flagged as not a name because it's a Lakota name. And there are very few Lakota names in the training set that was used to train this model. Okay? So the issue is not whether there were proportionately enough names, okay, but given that there are very few Lakota, and if Lakota names look and feel different than other names in the universe, then there needs to be sufficient representation for that to be reflected in the model. Okay? That is equity. And that is not proportionality. And what this means is that minority groups actually, small minority groups actually need to be boosted in a data set to be able to get the right results. The questions then become, which minority groups should we deal with? Right? And again, the starting point is to say, well, let's begin with historically marginalized demographic groups. African Americans, women, those are sort of the standard places that one starts because there are significant reasons to begin there. However, there could be many other groups. And being data-driven, we should be able to look at the data and find other groups where there are differences. Right? So our standard, for instance, race-based census classification would never identify a Lakota as a group. Right? There might be education level, there might be rural, urban. These are all things that are sociologically important in various contexts. And we don't know, we may know, if you're a domain expert in a particular context, what will matter or what is likely to matter. But as a data person, I don't know upfront what matters. And the question is, can I computationally try to figure it out? Right? And then intersectionality is really important. And so we are not looking only for one thing at a time, but we want to look for all of these things at a time. And so these are the kinds of data representation equity issues that I deal with. So this is, I talk about facets of data equity, and what we've been talking about so far is what I call representation equity, which is rows of the data. So who is present in the data set, or how often are they present, right? One can also look at feature equity, which is what attributes are we recording for the elements that are present. And the choice of what variables to record makes a big difference. And things that are not recorded are usually imputed, and imputations come with all kinds of issues, though they're often necessary and unavoidable. Finally, there is access equity. Now again, The data sets themselves, in most circumstances, won't be available to the user of the results from the data set. For instance, there'll be privacy considerations. Okay? Nevertheless, one should be able to provide equitable access. And what that means is, if you were denied a loan, you should know why you were denied a loan. You should have assurance that the bank didn't consider some spurious data because of some error. And these are information pieces that can be given to you without disclosing details of training data that involved other customers or disclosing proprietary secrets. Okay? So how to do this is some of the sorts of things that I've been working on. Now, one of the things, too, is often the way that you provide information is you summarize it. There's a lot of data, and what you want is a little textual snippet that tells you what it is. And not everything that is a summary is a good summary. Okay? So here's a statement from Bernie Sanders in March of 2020 after the California primary, Democratic primary, where he claimed that if you look at California, people of color, we won that big time against Joe Biden, not even close. This statement, as a summary, is true. Okay? However, it is not a good summary because it is misleading. And it is misleading because Bernie Sanders actually won big. If you look at what people of color means, look at major segments, he won big with Latinos, he won big with Asian Americans, but he lost big with African Americans. And he was trying to claim with this statement that he actually also won with African Americans. So how do we catch things like this? And we can computationally. So that brings me to, so now data equity matters. So I think I'm not going to say more about this. That brings me to the third part. So I have lots of research on diversity and on equity. I have no research on inclusion. So the title of the talk, to remind you, doesn't say inclusion, so there's no false advertising. But let me tell you why I think this is the case. Okay, so Peter Drucker famously said, this is a management consultant, you cannot improve what you cannot measure. Diversity is easy to measure, inclusion is very hard to measure. Okay, in the case of big data, volume is easy to measure, variety is very hard to measure. Things that are hard to measure get overlooked, get less work done. It's just much harder to do it. And for me as a technologist, it's just very hard to define problems even in inclusion. So that's my excuse. However, therefore, I have a different story for inclusion. So at the Michigan Institute of Data Science, I've got the mission statement up there, and it's there for a reason. When I became director 5 years ago, there was one of the first questions that was a pressing question to address was, who is a data scientist? Who are you serving? And the answer that we came up with was provided by the Pope. And it is, if you say you're a data scientist, we accept that you're a data scientist. If you say that you're doing AI, we'll accept that you're doing AI. Our job at Midas is to support you and to help you and to facilitate your work wherever you are with this, right? And this has been really critical, I think, in terms of what we do, because research institutes, there are a lot of them at the university, they all advance the preeminence of our university in whatever field they are in. Okay. We, I think, have a special role because of this highlighted part of our mission statement, which is to try to help everybody at the university use data science and AI to advance whatever it is that they're doing. So with that, I want to thank my family, in particular my wife, who's Radha Krishna, who's an eminent scholar in her own right, and without whom nothing that I've been talking about would have been possible. We all know, if you're professors, that students really do all the work. So we just cheerlead. People I enjoy working with in Midas. I have too many colleagues in computer science and engineering to have everybody's picture up there. Plus, they have a sense of humor. These are, I'm really grateful for a really wonderful work environment, and I guess they nominated me for this, so I'm grateful for that too. And then, of all the wonderful things at Michigan, if I had to pick one, it would be the fact that I have had the pleasure of interacting with and learning from scholars who are at the top of their game in so many different areas. It has just been an amazing trip. So to close, we've lost a slide here, it looks like. So to close, I'm going to tell you about Ted Codd, whose picture I had, but somehow there was a glitch. Edgar F. Codd got his PhD from the University of Michigan in 1965 in mathematics. And in 1970, wrote a paper that started the field of relational databases, relational database management, and which is the field that I work in, and that is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So I'm really proud to be able to have his name in my professorship. But the one other point that I wanted to leave you with was Ted Codd started working on his PhD, started graduate school at the age of 37, got his PhD at the age of 42. And so if we think about diversity and non-traditional students, we've got an example to follow. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for that lecture. Questions for our speaker? I'm happy to begin with the first question, which is looking to the first two parts of your talk and actually kind of connecting it to the last part where I had a sense that the difficulty in inclusion is not knowing what has been left out. I'm kind of wondering if when you think about advancing in a data science way, having something that is diverse and something that is equitable, are those always in accord, or are there times when they cannot necessarily be reconciled? You kind of presented the two separately. Could you talk a little bit about how they go together and if they go together well, or if there's research there to understand that?
So at least in terms of the technical things that I presented, the diversity aspect I focused on the variety of things and so on, and the equity was in terms of the counting of things. And so since they're two separate tasks, you can mix and match, and it isn't so difficult. However, I think that there is a deeper answer to your question, which is anytime you talk about equity or fairness, the definition of what is equitable or what is fair is often not set in stone. You know, it's not obvious, and people's frame of reference and value systems and so on come into play. And there are plenty of mathematical theorems that show that you can take two different definitions, two different reasonable definitions of equity, and not have both of them be satisfied at the same time. And so you have to end up choosing.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there another question from our audience? Yes, please, right next to you there. Thank you.
Hi, Jagadish. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I was wondering, given the holes in the databases that you were describing with respect to representation, isn't it then also a good resource for identifying what those holes are?
Yes. That's the short answer. So in fact, a lot of my work has been trying to have efficient algorithms to find holes, right? And finding the holes is actually not so easy if there are a combinatorial number of places there could be.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is there another question from our audience? Yes, right there. There's a microphone coming to you. Thank you.
Hello. So I was wondering, is there any way that your databases compensate for different terminology? For example, in your very first display that you were showing, where I grew up, there are different meanings for the word buggy. Like, we think of it, okay, a buggy drawn by a horse. Or where I grew up, we also called like a pram or a stroller a buggy also. So how do you work with data to distinguish which one you're referring to?
That's actually very hard to do. So context matters, and so in natural language we have many meanings for many words, and if a word can have multiple meanings, we have to figure out which meaning is intended, and we usually do that from context, and even as humans, we don't always do it perfectly. The problem with a given data set is it's often stripped of context. And so my table, for instance, I simply said buggies, and you have no idea which kind of buggies I was talking about, except perhaps because you look at the next couple of things, and it's probably not prams.
Great. Please join me in thanking Distinguished University Professor Jagadish. If any of you in the back of the room would like a seat, there's a few here in the front that you're welcome to. Thank you.
Thank you for that fascinating presentation, and especially for all you've done for Midas and elevating data science on our campus, Jag. Phenomenal. Well, we are at the time for our last lecture, and before we do that, I would like to recognize that we have Representative Debbie Dingell, who has joined us. Representative Dingell is a fabulous supporter of the university, and I believe is here as a friend for our last distinguished lecture. So with that, I would like to introduce Eva Feldman, who is the James W. Albers Distinguished University Professor and the Russell N. DeYoung Professor of Neurology in the Medical School. She's the director of the ALS Center of Excellence and the Neuro Network for Emerging Therapies at Michigan Medicine. Professor Feldman is a renowned clinician scientist who's devoted her career to understanding and treating neurological disorders. She's annually listed as one of the best doctors in the nation. A past president of the American Neurological Association and member and current counselor of the National Academy of Medicine, her research is internationally recognized with more than 500 published articles and 55,000 citations. The inaugural director of the A. Alfred Taubman Medical Research Institute when Taubman gave $100 million to support translational research. She's the only person to receive U of M Medical Center Alumni Society Early and Advanced Career Distinguished Achievement Awards. Continuously NIH funded since 1989, her team of 25 scientists conducts pioneering studies on the pathogenesis of neuropathy and dementia in metabolic diseases and the effect of the exposome on ALS, leveraging in vitro, in vivo models, clinical specimens, multiple omics-based approaches, and clinical trials. Her research identified dyslipidemia during diabetes as a key driver of nervous system damage, contributing to new patient care guidelines. Awarded a prestigious NIH Director's Transformative Award, her work with the ALS exposome revealed that pesticides increase ALS risk and decrease ALS survival, leading to, and this work has led to ALS prevention programs. With a strong track record of directly translating basic research into advances in clinical treatment, she's mentored over 100 fellows and 10 graduate students and currently oversees more than 10 federal grants. Please join me in welcoming Professor Eva Feldman to deliver her distinguished lecture.
Oh, thank you so much, Lori. It's really such a pleasure and honor to be with you here today. And as you heard, I'm going to speak about the exposome and neurologic disease, where science can actually meet patient care. So I've been on faculty for 35 years, and here's my first year on faculty. I had a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 3-month-old. And I also had Dr. James Albers as my mentor. Now, Jim was and is a remarkable mentor for junior faculty, and he gave me the roadmap to success in my career. He's here today with his wife, daughter, and son-in-law, and I can't thank him or his wife, Jan, enough for everything they have done for me throughout my career. Now, Jim himself is an extremely well-known neurologist, and he's done seminal work on the complications of diabetes in large clinical trials, as well as working on neurotoxicology, neurotoxicants, and their neurologic effect. So it was really his work that generated my interest in the exposome. So what is the exposome? Well, it's a very simple concept. It's the lifetime of exposures that you each are subjected throughout your age. So today I'm going to tell you 2 exposome stories. One is a story of a lifetime of sedentary behavior and eating not so great food, which will lead to obesity and complications. The second story I'm going to tell you is one of a lifetime of being subjected to toxicants and specific occupations that can lead to amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. So let's begin with the first story. So we are in an obesity pandemic. In the US right now, 36% of all adults are obese. Another 35% are overweight. And that is really just the tip of the iceberg. We are the most obese country in the world. And with this obesity pandemic has come a diabetes pandemic. And as you can see here in the US, we have right now, I will tell you, about 60 million individuals with diabetes, and twice that number with prediabetes. And our numbers are projected to increase by 24% in the next 20 years. But that's really, our increases are somewhat dwarfed by what's happening in Africa, Asia, and South and Central America in terms of the increase. So it's really quite alarming. And these pandemics are the result of what I'll call the Western lifestyle exposome. So what is that? Well, that's excessive food intake, a very sedentary lifestyle, and that will lead to elevated fasting lipids and glucose and will result in multiple neurologic complications. Now, the most common complication is what is called peripheral neuropathy. And usually that complication is attributed to type 2 diabetes. And what you have with peripheral neuropathy is a distal to proximal loss of nerve damage. So starts in the feet and progresses eventually up to the hands. And the nerve damage mirrors the patient's symptomatology. So patients complain of really severe burning, tingling, very discomforting feet. And it is a very disabling disorder, very common in America. At least half of the people with diabetes have neuropathy. So the question, though, was, there was a conundrum, because the dogma was the peripheral neuropathy was due to type 2 diabetes. Yet I, as a clinician, would control type 2 diabetes, and there'd be little effect on stopping the progression of the neuropathy. So the question, why? Well, a very talented fellow joined me, Dr. Brian Callahan, and he performed over a nearly 10-year period a series of studies. And in aggregate, the cohorts that Brian looked at accumulated over 14,000 persons. And what he showed conclusively was that peripheral neuropathy alone is not due to just to type 2 diabetes, but rather it's due to what's known as the metabolic syndrome. So what is the metabolic syndrome that underlies peripheral neuropathy? Well, it's not one factor, but a suite of metabolic disturbances that include obesity, dyslipidemia, hyperglycemia, and insulin resistance for the type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and inflammation. This finding really changes patient care, as you will hear. And for this sentinel finding, Brian received this December the Eva L. Feldman Professor of Neurology, secondary to a very kind gift from a friend of mine, Edie Briskin. So I'm very proud that he's the very first professor, and he, of course, is sitting here in the audience. So as we were doing these studies, one thing we noticed is that with type 2 diabetes and the metabolic syndrome, we were also seeing a lot of evidence of brain disease. So there were imaging structural changes in our patients. We would see evidence of atrophy, loss of connections, even microbleeds in our patients. And similar to what we saw in peripheral neuropathy, the brain changes occur in parallel with symptomatology. So our patients would have poor memory, impaired executive function, slow processing speed. And these data that we were accumulating were also being accumulated by many other groups. Now, lucky for us, I share many common interests with my friends, Larry and Andy Wolf, but one of the common interests is in brain health, diet, and exercise. So they generously funded a Wolf Healthy Brain Initiative, allowing us to, I will say, think out of the box. And so we did think out of the box, and we said, look, peripheral neuropathy and brain disease share the same exposome, so could they share the same pathophysiology? And in come my amazing, wonderful basic scientists, led by Dr. Stephanie Aid. This team has gone on to tackle this problem. And let me tell you that story. So when you have a clinical problem and you want to bring it into the basic science laboratory, the first thing you need to do is create an animal model. So what we did is we high-fat fed mice, and what we found is that just like humans, they develop the metabolic syndrome with exactly the same characteristics. Next step, of course, was to take these metabolic syndrome high-fat fed mice and see if they develop peripheral neuropathy and cognitive impairment. And indeed they do, very similarly to humans. So, next step, let's try to understand the mechanism of this. And what we found is there was significant evidence that the peripheral and the central nervous system were undergoing what I'll call an energy crisis. So we had evidence of oxidative stress, inflammation, Alzheimer's disease pathology. It was really quite impressive. And that seems strange. They're starved, yet there's an excess of glucose and lipids everywhere. So that led us to focus in on the mitochondria. So every cell in your body has a mitochondria. Excuse me, could you get me my water? Or could someone? Thanks. Every cell, I'm so sorry. Every cell in your body has many mitochondria, actually. Excuse me. Anyway, so what these mitochondria do is they use lipids and sugars to generate energy, known as ATP. Now, importantly, energy production has waste products. These mitochondria are like little factories generating energy, and like any factory, it generates waste. But the mitochondria also have this built-in garbage disposal. So here's an example of what a mitochondria looks like, an electron micrograph. And you see these nice lines. Well, these are the cristae of the mitochondria where the ATP, the energy, is made, and also where the garbage disposal lies. And so what we began to do is really look at, in detail, mitochondria in the laboratory. Now here you see we've labeled mitochondria with the yellow dye. And what you're seeing here, this is the cell body of a nerve, and this is the long axon, the long nerve fiber that the mitochondria have to traffic down. And if they don't traffic correctly, well, the nerves can't work, right? Because you require that energy for movement. So what we found is that the Western diet results in mitochondrial injury. So these excess lipids and these excess sugars enter the mitochondria, and it floods the mitochondria, and the garbage disposal fails. So there's this toxic waste buildup, and with this toxic waste buildup comes a lack of energy. They're not able to make energy, reactive oxygen species, and inflammation. Now, here's an example of what the mitochondria look like in a Western diet. Those beautiful cristae are gone. They're disruptive. They're non-functional. You get neuropathy. You get brain disease. But there is some hope, and I will show you that in a moment, for the fact that these mitochondria degenerate, cause peripheral neuropathy. They degenerate. There's then loss of connections, and there's clear brain atrophy. The hope lies in diet. So what we have done is looked at multiple different diets. We've taken the animal and given them a really strict diet, and we see that their metabolism improves, as does their neuropathy and cognition. We place them on a Mediterranean diet, and again, we see partial improvement of their metabolism. They still remain obese, but their cognition clearly improves. And finally, a ketogenic diet seems like a real winner, very interestingly. Improved metabolism and improved cognition. So this body of work has led to a position statement by the American Diabetes Association on the treatment of neuropathy. And of course, glucose control is advocated. What's also advocated are lifestyle changes. So diet and exercise are now advocated as first-line treatment in patients with type 2 diabetes and the metabolic syndrome. So that's my first example of where science meets patient care. And I was privileged to work on these guidelines with my good friend, Rodika Papasui, who was the lead author on these guidelines. And Rodika, who's here today, is the Sonderquist Professor of Diabetes. She's also the Vice Chair of Clinical Research in the Department of Internal Medicine, President of the American Diabetes Association, and I show her here holding, which she received this year, the Banting Medal, which is the highest award that anyone in the diabetes field can receive. So, let me tell you my second story, the lifetime of exposures that can lead to ALS. But before I do, let me introduce you to some really interesting people. So I met Harriet Hiller and Al Taubman within the same 6-month period. Harriet came to me, and I diagnosed her with ALS. Alfred came to me, and he's a very interesting man, philanthropist, very well-to-do, and very interested in ALS because his best friend, Senator Javits, had just died of ALS. So keep that in mind. And then when Harriet would come to clinic, she would always be with either her daughter, Linda, or her son, Jim. And Jim, too, became very interested in ALS research. And Jim, who's here today with his wife, Marge, gave us our first major gift. When Jim gave us that gift for ALS research, that kind of piqued Al Taubman's interest. He then gave us a gift for ALS research. And then that allowed me to bring into my team Dr. Stephen Goutman. And the work I'm going to tell you from here on in has been done equally with Stephen, who is sitting right there, and I cannot thank enough. So Stephen works with me in my research program and also is now directing clinical care in the Pranger ALS Clinic. And I'm really pleased to say that in 2024, Stephen will become the inaugural Harriet Hiller Research Professor. But what about Al? Well, so Al went on to have a greater interest outside ALS. He founded the Taubman Institute, shown here. And here are the initial Taubman scholars, Dr. David Pinsky, who I see is here today, and then Dr. Max Wisha. But we initially founded the Taubman Institute on a smaller amount of money than Provost Macaulay mentioned, but because of the amazing persuasive powers of two remarkable leaders, President Mary Sue Coleman, and it was at that time EVPMA, Dr. Ora Peskovitz. He then did give a full $100 million. And I want to thank both President Coleman and particularly President Peskovitz, who is now president of Oakland University, for their mentorship, their leadership, and all they taught me during that process. Michigan is definitely a much better place today because of these two remarkable leaders. And again, what about Al? Well, he went on to just love the Taubman Institute. He spent so much time in our laboratory, he actually had his own laboratory coat, as people know who are here today. And I'm showing a picture here of him with his emerging scholars, who he really liked. And I see some of them here today, Dr. Lahan, Dr. Sen, so thank you for coming. That would have made Alfred so happy. Of course, these emerging scholars are now leaders in their field. Back to ALS. So ALS is a progressive neurodegenerative disease, non-curable from diagnosis to death, 2 to 4 years. I think what's important, and I want you to remember, we have in Michigan one of the highest prevalences of ALS of any state in the United States. And we contend that in large part it's because of our environment. Now, Michigan has a large and robust industrial and agricultural heritage. And I show you here major toxic emissions, toxic release inventory facilities in Michigan are in blue, and National Priority List Superfund sites are in red. But I should note that the EPA just this week has announced, because of work that Representative Dingell has been doing beneath this, to the EPA, that the toxic Gelman bloom here in Ann Arbor is now going to hopefully be added to the Superfund site. So we have a heritage, unfortunately, of toxicity. Now, the ALS exposome, therefore, is a very large problem. And our team has actually looked at each aspect of this exposome. But what I'm going to discuss with you today are just two aspects: pesticides and pollutant exposure, and also occupation and occupational exposures. Now, we are all, every day, exposed to environmental toxins. because they come from our everyday products. So organochlorine pesticides have been banned since the 80s, but they are in our water, they are in our lakes, they are in our soil. Flame retardants persist in the environment for decades, the polybrominated diphenol ethers. And finally, there are the polychlorinated biphenol PCBs. These are coolants and lubricants, again, used commonly, pervasive in our environment. So what we do is we take a tube of blood from each ALS patient, and we look for these products. We actually measure 122 toxins. And here's what we have found. We have, in 3 separate studies, we have found a significant increase in these toxins in our ALS patients, clearly associated with ALS risk. All of these toxin classes are associated with ALS risk. Pesticide exposures, pesticide levels sometimes are up to 5-fold, frequently 5-fold higher in our ALS patients in one of our studies. Now, what's important is you can look at all these toxicants separately, right? But you can also put them together as a mixture because you're just not, exposed to one toxicant or one pesticide, but all together. And that forms, and we've done that, and what we've developed is what's known as environmental risk score, so a summation of these toxins. And what we can see is that if you look at the environmental risk score, 2 things. One is the higher the ERS, the score, the higher the ALS risk, but also the higher the ERS score, the shorter the patient's survival. And so if, for example, take a person who's going to live for 2 years, that survival shortened by a high ERS by about 6 months. So that's a good percentage of their life. We've also looked at occupations and occupational exposures. And here are the results of 2 studies, one looking at ALS risk and the other looking at ALS survival. And it's really critical to know that production occupations clearly elevate ALS risk. And those are the people on the line. Those are the people doing the work. Also, what increases ALS risk are jobs with pesticides, metals, and particulate matter. That increases the risk, and no surprise, if you have those jobs, you also have a decreased survival. Importantly for Michigan, 10% of our workforce are in production occupations. So 1 out of 10 people are exposed to this risk in Michigan. Now, I'd like to end with 2 good pieces of news. One is that because of these data, we have really decided to think about ALS prevention. And we have this moonshot goal, and that's the goal of preventing ALS. And to do a moonshot, you need to have a team, which we have. A remarkable geneticist, Dr. Sorter, Dr. Stuart Batterman, who's been my colleague for many years and has done the pollutant assessments that I just discussed with you. Of course, Stephen, who I've mentioned, and then Dr. Mukherjee, who has helped develop the ERS score, along with other multiple really esteemed colleagues. And we just received this NIH Director's Transformative Award, where we're going to look at the genetics of all our patients, then we're going to combine it with the ERS to understand the genetic risk and the environmental risk, so we then can really do ALS prevention. And finally, we just received an award to do the very first in kind, so it's never been done in the US or elsewhere in the world, to do a prospective study of 4,000 healthy production workers to see what are the risk factors that we can see to identify ALS. And actually, we're calling it My Brain. It launches next year in January, because we're very hopeful we can expand it not only to ALS, but maybe to other brain diseases. And so these patients or these healthy participants are going to take whoops, I hit the wrong button again. There we go. Electronic surveys of exposure, lifestyle, general health, motor function and brain and health genetics via saliva swabs. So we think if we can do a prospective study to understand ALS, it will allow us to understand and develop prevention studies. So that is my second and final example. Not the final one in our laboratory, right? We're very excited about what we've been doing, but for today, where science meets patient care. Like my colleagues, I need to and want to acknowledge, in my case, I'm really acknowledging the really remarkable scientists that I work with right now. We take an annual picture each year, just like a holiday picture, so to speak. And here we are about a month ago. And my really close colleagues who I work with in my group, and also Dr. Papasuli, and then all the amazing funding agencies who have been so supportive of our work. I also want to thank my friends, who are many of whom are here today. And they have been such a source of support and encouragement for me over the years. When you have small children, as you raise them, it's always good to have a village, and I have had that, and I'm so deeply grateful. And finally, my family. So to start with, here's the 5-year-old, right? Here's the 3-year-old, and here's the 3-month-old. And here, and then my stepdaughters, and then spouses. And then here is my remarkable husband, Dr. Neil Little, who is a source of support, love, endless patience, and I could not be on the stage today without him. And finally, as I was preparing this talk, you know, I saw my past, which I actually see in this auditorium. I saw my present, which again I see, and I also see the future. So it's really the fabric of my life, my last 35 years at Michigan. And I want to thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much.
Professor Feldman, if you're willing to entertain a question or two, we'd love to have you still on the stage.
I was thinking it's time to have a glass of wine.
Well, that will be just in a few moments. If questions, we see you to start us off right there. Thank you.
Hi, Eva. So I've heard you talk about this last part many times.
Yes.
But given that so much of this is happening here in Michigan,
Right.
what strikes me as I hear you talking about it for probably the umpteenth time, how is it that there's not greater awareness of ALS and the potential for its, high levels here in Michigan because of the pollutants? And don't you think that if there was a higher awareness of its environmental factors, there might be maybe greater
Yes, of
focus on
course.
it, and then greater focus on the work that you and Stephen and your whole team are doing? I mean,
Right.
it just
No, it's
strikes me, again,
Right.
you and I
It's-
talk about it all the time, but
It's a
as I
great
s-
question, Allison. And so two things. One is we're trying to make ALS a reportable disease in Michigan, and we're working very hard with it. Dr. Michael Ritter is leading us on this charge, and he's here today. And we are at the state level, and maybe within a year it will become reportable. And we think if we can make it reportable, ALS reportable, that will actually increase awareness. And as you know, we will go and talk about this in front of any group at any time. We're also extremely hopeful that our research will help Michigan become a cleaner state. And I really want to thank Representative Dingell again for pushing through and at least getting the Gelman plume on the Superfund side so it can be cleaned for all of us, right? So there isn't enough awareness, I agree. There's so many, conflicting issues in nationally and at the state level, but clearly it needs to happen. And hopefully we'll make ALS reportable. I think if we make it reportable, my mantra is we'll be able to make a percentage of it preventable.
Thank you. One more question?
So your lifetime of work, and you are simply remarkable. So just congratulations. So is ALS inexorable? Or can somebody leave this toxic area and maybe reverse this?
So we don't know that, and that's a great question, right? What we do is we look at histories 30 years back of our patients, and we have a very good epidemiological survey that really Dr. Batterman and Dr. Goutman are leading. And you know, we look at their past exposures, but we currently can only measure their exposures now. So we don't have that answer. We looked at teeth. You can take teeth, which we've done on our patients, and look at what they've been exposed to since the age of 15. And we do see certain metals associate with ALS. But in terms of the pollutants, we can't say. I wish we could, but we can't.
Well, please join me in thanking Distinguished University Professor Eva Feldman. This concludes our symposium. We invite you to join us for a reception just out the doors there that will be beginning now. Thank you very much for joining us today.